Hello and thanks for joining the Microsoft Intune Role Administration video series. This is video 1, Right-Sizing Your Azure Active Directory Roles. My first recommendation is that you limit the number of Azure Active Directory global administrators. Seems pretty straightforward, but as I talk to many customers, we find that they actually have quite a few more global administrators than are really necessary. So I encourage you to take a look at the documentation for assigning administrative roles. After we go through this slide, I'll give you an example of how you can right-size using the administrative console in Azure Portal. The second recommendation that I have is to use Privileged Identity Manager to elevate permissions on demand. If you're an Azure Active Directory Premium user, you have Privileged Identity Manager available to you. This allows you to indicate which administrators can be elevated in their permissions on demand, either at their request or on a scheduled basis. Take a look at the documentation link for how to get started using Privileged Identity Manager. And lastly, I'd like you to limit the number of Intune administrators. Intune administrators that are assigned in Azure Active Directory have full permissions for everything in Intune. And oftentimes I find that it's simply a matter of convenience that customers have assigned Intune administrators. But in reality, you need to limit the administrative permissions for those administrators who are doing day-to-day operations in Intune to only those activities that are part of their job responsibility. So let's switch over and take a look in the console and see how to accomplish each of these three different tasks. We're here in the Azure portal. Let's go to Azure Active Directory, and we'll choose Roles and Administrators. You'll see a list of all of the roles available for Azure Active Directory, and some of them have a little banner next to them. These have recently been added, and oftentimes the reason for these new roles is so that you can separate out permissions for what was previously required as a global administrator. So I encourage you to see whether or not those are more appropriate roles for some of your administrators rather than global administrator. Now, if we look at the list of global administrators that we have for this particular tenant, you'll see we have 3 different administrators: Abby, Glenn, and Miriam. Now it turns out that Abby is actually only on backup for Miriam, so she doesn't need to be a global administrator all the time. So let's manage these roles in Privileged Identity Manager. Here's the 3 administrators that we have, Miriam, Glenn, and Abby, and we want to change Abby from being permanent to being on demand. So if we simply select Abby, choose Make Eligible, this will convert her from being a permanent global administrator to one who's eligible to become a global administrator on demand. That's all that's necessary to do here. So I would encourage you to take a look through the list of global administrators, make sure that they're right-sized for their permissions, and when necessary, use Privileged Identity Manager to ensure that they can elevate to the proper permissions on demand. Now lastly, I suggested that you limit the number of Intune administrators. Let's see who we have for this particular tenant. It looks like I have 4 administrators: Walter, Steve, Uma, and Sue. Now it turns out that Walter actually is my worldwide administrator for Intune, so I'm going to leave him as an Intune administrator. Steve performs backup for Walter, so I'm also going to leave him as an Intune administrator. However, Uma and Sue actually have day-to-day responsibilities that don't require use of all of Intune, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove them as a member of the Intune administrator role. Now I only have the 2 people who are responsible for managing all of Intune on a day-to-day basis or being a backup. Later on in the series, we'll cover how to assign the specific rights and permissions in an Intune role that makes sense for day-to-day operations. Thanks for watching this video.